Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy to have Barry Broad with us today. He's the president of the Jewish Federation here in Sacramento. Thank you for joining us, Barry.
Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. You and I have been friends now for some years, and it's good to sit at the table with you. Tell us where you were born and raised and started life and went to high school and all of that stuff.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles, and I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in North Hollywood. When I went to Ulysses S. Grant High School, and I can tell you at the time my fondest memory was when the students decided they wanted to change the name to Cary Grant High School. That was unsuccessful. When I was about 16, my parents moved to Orange County, so I graduated high school in Fullerton, California, and then came to Northern California to go to college at UC Davis.
And did you have a happy childhood? Was it a good time?
Yes, I had a happy childhood. My had a lovely family. My dad, my mom, and my brother. I have a younger brother. My dad died young, however, when I was in my early 20s. And so there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about him, and that certainly informs a lot of my feelings as a parent.
Did you grow up in a religious home?
I did. A Reformed Jewish religious home. We, celebrated the major holidays. We went to Hebrew school, both my brother and I. We were both bar mitzvahed. And my mom, interestingly enough, taught at our synagogue in Los Angeles. She taught religious school in our synagogue. And we attended, Jewish summer camp like a lot of kids. And so we had a very sort of rich religious background. But I wouldn't say that we were super observant.
Oh, fair enough. By any chance, was camp up in the Lake Arrowhead area or any place like that? I went to a summer camp a couple of times, and there were all these different groups up in that area.
Our camp happened to be in the Malibu Hills. It was a camp called Camp Hess Kramer.
And week long and filled full of all sorts of fun. And
yeah, it was great. It was great. I went a number of years, and then I was actually a camp counselor.
Now, what brought you to UC Davis? I mean, were you on scholarship? You just wanted to leave Southern California? What brought you up here?
Yeah, I wanted to go. I grew up in Southern California, and I wanted to sort of go someplace different. And my family's finances were such that my father told me I could attend any University of California in the world. And of course, at that time, a university education in California was very, very heavily subsidized and was almost free education. So it was affordable for our family. And so I thought I wanted to come to Northern California where there were rivers filled with water and seasons and things like that I had never experienced as a child. And so I chose UC Davis.
What did your father do for a living?
My dad was a sort of a businessman, not a hugely successful businessman, but he worked first for an advertising agency, and then he worked for a kind of a headhunter firm, and then he worked for a company that produced like training films for the healthcare industry.
So when did you decide what you wanted to do with your life?
Well, interestingly enough, my parents were a major influence, and my dad had always wished he had gone to law school. And from a very young age, he told me and my brother, we should be lawyers, because if you're a lawyer, you could always earn a living, and no matter what, you can hang your own shingle out and go into business for yourself and all that. And I think, you tell your kids stuff enough, maybe they even believe it. So it turned out that both my brother and I became lawyers, and for a while, I considered being a historian and going to graduate school. And I spent a sort of very interesting year abroad in my junior year of college at Cambridge University in England, and came back certain that I wanted to be a lawyer rather than an academic. and I decided that I really wanted to be involved in doing things that would have positive change for people.
Now, there's two things I know about you pretty well. One is that you are active in helping to bring about change and to bring attention to people, things that need to be changed. And then I also know that you're very actively involved in the Jewish community and what unfolds with the Federation, the JCRC. What brought you to those things? Was there an epiphany that somewhere along the way I've got to do this or that or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I was always supportive of the Jewish community and to charities and so on, and a participant in the Jewish community, but not active as a volunteer. And about maybe 12 or 13 years ago, an incident occurred involving our local PBS station, which was the only PBS station in the United States that had decided not to show a documentary on Frontline, the show Frontline, about anti-Semitism in the Arab world. And I felt that that was a kind of form of self-censorship. And I was really upset by that, because I think what is the hallmark of our country is that we have the free flow of ideas. That's inherent in a democracy. And when the purveyors of information, like a television station, decide that the truth is too upsetting for people to hear, and that was the excuse, it would upset the delicate balance of the Sacramento community in some way, I thought that was just wrong. And I contacted the JCRC and said, I'd like to go along when you talk to the station and volunteer to be in the meetings. And from that, I became active in the Jewish Community Relations Council. Ultimately, I became the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council, and then I started to serve on the board of the Jewish Federation and became its president several years ago.
Now, the JCRC, which I know a little bit more about than the Federation, are very proactive in just lots of good things. And one of the things that I've sort of liked about it personally is there's many of the women involved as there are the men, and they bring a strong female perspective as well as the male perspective that, you know, I know a little bit more about, seeing as how I'm a boy. Is that, did that just happen, or what brought that about?
I would say that something about Jewish culture is that we have always had a strong presence of women in our culture. Jewish women were educated and literate in the Middle Ages, centuries before the education of women generally became acceptable even. And even though the traditional practice of Orthodox Judaism, obviously, you know, women couldn't be rabbis and so on, and still can't. They can in the Reform congregations. But we have always had enormous equality of gender in our institutions. It's important, and women have and should have a powerful voice in everything that we do. Women, for example, have served in the Israeli army since the beginning of an Israeli army, and long before women were serving actively in military roles and in combat roles in other countries. So it is a tradition in our culture, in our religion, to afford women a strong voice.
I've liked that, Barry, because my mother was a strong voice, and my wife is a fiercely independent woman. Both of my grandmothers were wonderful women. And I know your daughter's been in the Army in Israel, and now she's out. Did she have a good experience?
Well, she had the experience, I think that, I mean, I wasn't in the military. She decided to emigrate to Israel. She volunteered to be in the Israeli army and served 2 years. She had, I would say, a very rich experience. I am sure there were many ups and there were many downs and there were frustrations. Armies are big bureaucratic institutions. They serve a purpose of national defense, but they don't, they can be very frustrating. You don't always get what you want, and you have to do what other people want you to do, and sometimes it doesn't always make sense. But I think the concept of national service that exists in Israel and maybe should exist in this country to a greater degree teaches young people a level of responsibility and civic duty that I think is incredible, and it has matured her as I saw that it did to the other kids that she served with that I got to know.
I spent 4 years in the military, and you go in at 18 and you're a little brain dead. Actually, life's just been about girls and cars and slick clothes and the things that 18-year-olds like. And not only was the responsibility taught, but the discipline of sometimes you do get your way and sometimes you don't. And you have to think that through and go, learn what it is you've got to do to make that. Now, I'm keenly aware in Sacramento of congregations B'nai Israel, Mosaic Law, and Beth Shalom. Three important and, deeply integrated in our community synagogues. And they are led by some really fine people, and not only the rabbis, but those that are staffing and working on boards and that. Is there enough Jewish representation in our community?
Well, first of all, those are 3 synagogues. There's several more. The Orthodox Synagogue Knesset Israel. There's a Chabad house here in Sacramento. There's a Temple Or Rishon in Roseville. And our federation stretches all the way, the Sacramento region stretches all the way to Reno and south towards Modesto-ish, and east into Lake Tahoe, and west to Vacaville and Fairfield. And there are smaller synagogues and congregations in many of those places. The Jewish community in this region is very synagogue-oriented. And however, there are many unaffiliated Jews who do not belong to any synagogue. The job of the Federation, or one of the main jobs of the Federation, is to reach out to Jewish people who are unaffiliated, have not made those connections, and to provide resources for them, social services where they need social services, particularly for the elderly or people that have disabilities. And so yes, I mean, we are sort of represented well by institutions in the community. Could we do a better job? Absolutely. We can all always do a better job.
But there's an awful lot of good stuff unfolding out of the synagogues that I know a little bit more about than I do some of the others. A lot of good being done.
Absolutely, and we're blessed in this community with a lot of people who are active participants and who are willing to take on important jobs. And in the, for the Jewish religion is a little unique in the sense that we're a religion and an ethnicity and a nationality.
That's a good way to say that.
All wrapped up into one. And we come from all backgrounds, all nationalities, every race that you can think of. And there's almost not a country in the world where Jewish people haven't been or lived or descend from or once lived. And so there's an amazing variety of people in our community that are bound by this rich historical and religious tradition.
I have 2 friends who live in Folsom, both men. They live about 2 blocks away from each other. One would say, I haven't been to temple or anything since I was a child. The other one would say, I go every Tuesday night or whatever the day would be. But if you say to them, so what are you religiously? Both will just say without even flinching, I'm Jewish. Because that's where they come from. That's where the roots are, and they run deep, deep. And I've sort of enjoyed that. And even the one who claims he hasn't been to church in a long, long time has rich traditions and stories and events and circumstances to talk about and to tell about. And I always enjoyed being with them.
Well, I had a grandfather who was born in this country. His parents died when he was very young, and he was put in an orphanage. And he ran away from the orphanage. It was a Jewish orphanage, and this was probably in the 1890s. He lived a long time. He died in 1969.
Wow.
He ran away from the orphanage when he was 10. That was the last Jewish institution he ever set foot in or would set foot in. And he lived on the street, and he was a tough kid at that time, and he ran with Jewish ethnic gangs at the turn of the century, and they were quite aware of their religion and their ethnicity, even if they never stepped foot in a synagogue or would never step foot in a synagogue. And he, taught me to be proud and to defend my community, and because that's what he did. That's what he was forced to do at that time, and he taught me that above all else, we had to take care of each other and fight prejudice and oppression wherever it emerged, and that was a good lesson. And I think what's unusual, I think, about Jewish people is you don't stop being Jewish if you don't go to synagogue. You're still Jewish.
Well said. Well said.
You still are. Nothing changes about that. And there are many expressions of our ethnicity and religion, as many expressions as there are people. Sometimes I like to say it's a 3,500-year-old conversation, and people enter the conversation, but they rarely leave it. And
Good way to say that.
And that I think kind of has a feel for it. We're some people say we're people of the book, and I think I'd like to say we're people of the word.
So in our community, are we active enough, both from the Jewish perspective and from the non-Jewish perspective, on how we should be managing our lives and our families and our businesses and making Sacramento and California and America better and not worse?
Well, I think that's a big question. I think the Jewish community, being a relatively small minority religion and ethnic group in America, obviously we have very strong beliefs and connections and desires to see interfaith work done in our community. We think that's very important. We think that we need to reach out and do a better job reaching out to other faith groups in Sacramento from our own perspective. And it's not my place to criticize anybody else, but I can say from the position of self-criticism that I think the Jewish community has not done enough to reach out to other groups, and we need to do a better job at that, in my opinion.
Well, I know that if you talk about the Bob Dressers in life and so many others, and Melissa and Jessica and others that are now involved, they're trying hard to reach out. I think the 3,500-year religion is a big deal. It's a big deal. A lot of those 1,700 congregations in the three-county area may have only started up 17 years ago, and they might have a congregation of 67 people. And it's a long way from 17 years ago to 3,500 years ago. And so I told Bob one day, it's really important that the Jewish faith is involved in reaching out in our community, because they have a long history and a long record, and there'd be much to learn.
Well, and in our case, in a time of increasing anti-Semitism around the world, we and insecurity of Jewish communities around the world, the number of countries and places where it's safe to live as a Jewish person is shrinking, not growing. That is a fact of our time, and we need the support of people that will stand up and say, we oppose anti-Semitism, we oppose racism, we oppose hatred. And that's very important to us. That's the only way we can survive.
Well, that's a good way to say that. We spend way too much time on differences. When I say we, the community, doesn't matter what our background is. We spend way too much time on differences and not enough time on similarities. Now, the last 5 or 6 years, I usually go to some other church beyond my own several times a month, sometimes every weekend. And the similarities, Barry, are just so close. It's just incredible. All we're doing is calling them different, names or phrases or whatever, and we're all practicing this worship of God in a very, very similar way. But for some reason, we get irritated based on somebody's background or the color of their skin or the way they dress or speak or whatever, and so we say they must be our enemy.
Well, unfortunately, basically all these religions are more or less the same. I mean, when you strip away practice and ideology, there was a famous rabbi that lived about 2,000 years ago. He was ultimately martyred by the Romans, Rabbi Akiva. And someone came to him and said, "Rabbi, if you could describe in one sentence the whole Torah while I stand on one foot, what would you say?" And he said, "Treat others as you would treat yourself. Everything else is commentary." And in fact, that's the truth. Every single religious tradition has the golden rule as its basic premise.
It does.
And nonetheless, it's been the challenge of people to live up to something that we all agree on and have always agreed on.
Why why is that? Why, everybody I talk to agrees and understands that is the basic ideology of what it is we're trying to do, and yet we can say it, but then to do it seems to be a whole lot more difficult. But why can't I just treat that man over there like I want him to treat me? Why can't we do that?
Well, I think that honestly, how I feel about this, I'm not sure this is a religious answer or I'm not a cleric, but I would say that human beings have been given brains by whoever handed out the brains, whether it be a deity or through the course of evolution or whatever you believe or don't believe. We have arrived at where we have arrived. And we have a basic nature that we share with other creatures on this world, other primates or whatever, and our earlier selves. We're the same species that existed 15,000 years ago. We've made progress over time, great progress over time, and we've been given these brains that allow us to think beyond our base animal nature. But that's always a challenge. And so we can say to ourselves, love thy neighbor as thyself, but sometimes, for whatever reason, we return to the quiet of our own little world and say, all of them? I'm not comfortable with them, with the other people. There's us and there's them. And that seems to be a driving force in human nature that we must constantly battle and overcome. And that's why they invented the golden rule, to tell people, this is what you need to do, as difficult as it may be at times. That's why we have religion, in effect, is to allow us to let a higher standard guide us when we can't always do it ourselves.
Nicely said. Let me tell you a fast little story about all of this. By the time I was in the 3rd grade, I could outrun my older brothers. I don't know why that was. I just was born with the ability to run. And in 3rd grade, into our little tiny school, 22 kids in the class, in 3 other classes, so 60 or 70 kids in the school, came 2 Navajo boys. They were brothers. They were born a year apart. One was 3rd grade, one was 4th. And out on the playground the first day, I found out he could run faster than me. And that just was not cool, because I could outrun all my classmates and the ones that were several classes ahead of me. And it was sort of, you mean to tell me there's another boy on this planet who can run faster than me? And he's an Indian at the time, they weren't Native Americans back in the early 1950s. And I cried to my parents, and my dad said, well, this is a good thing. This is competition, and it shows you that there are others who can be bigger and stronger and faster, and you've got to learn to live within, you know, what your abilities are. And he made it into a really good thing. My mother dried my eyes and said, well, you can race him again another day, and we'll see how it goes. I had to absorb that over a 2 or 3 month period, that there was actually another third grader in the whole world who could outrun me on the playground when we'd run these, you know, 50-yard races or whatever they were. That was of a great benefit to me personally. It was a great lesson that there'd be other people who'd come along who could outthink me or outrun me or outjump me or whatever else, but it would be okay because I had a place in life to do the things that I needed to do. As soon as you know, and I didn't like him very well for a couple of months just because he could outrun me. But as soon as I came to grips with that, then we started hanging around and we started being friends. And pretty soon I found out there were some things that I could do a little better than him, and there were some other things he could do better than me. And we became great friends and remained so for a couple of school years till his family moved away. I have no idea where he is or what he's doing, but he was a great factor in my childhood by just lining up, and when they said ready, set, go, he took off like a rocket and left me in the dust. And it was a wonderful, wonderful teaching moment, though it took me several months to get through. And I've watched that all my life. Somebody else will come along who can do it a little better. So that greater force and religion that you talk about to help us deal with those things is just you said that really, really well. Let me ask you this. If you could wave a magic wand in your life and fix or repair or replace something, what would that be?
In the world or in my life?
In your life, you bet. All right.
I would, in my life, I have a pretty good life, and so sure there are places that it could improve, but I'm a fortunate man. I have wonderful, healthy children. I'm healthy myself. I have a rewarding career, and I am a participant in my community. I have all the books in the world to read that I will never get to. I have all the movies in the world that I want to see that I will never get to. So I'm lucky. I would like it if my children would somehow settle a little closer to, you know, where I'm living, or maybe I should go where they're living, although they're in different parts of the world. And but I do have hope and constant desire to see improvement in our society and our culture, and to see things get better for people. For me, not so much. I feel like I should be satisfied with the life that I have, which is a good one.
Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to meet you.